Okay, I want to talk a little bit about hydraulics, and really what I want to talk about is kind of the mystery or behind or the misunderstanding behind hydraulics and how to repair a hydraulic failure, and why is a hydraulic rod leaking, or why is the seal leaking when you just changed it, all those things, right? So a lot of people are just afraid to work on hydraulics, and I'll be honest with you, hydraulics are probably one of the simplest things to work on once you understand how they work, right? So once you understand that it's just a simple mechanism, a rod that is sliding with a plunger, and there's pressure applied to either side of that plunger to make the rod move in or out. That's really all that is happening there inside the cylinder, is that there's a rod attached to a plunger, and when you apply pressure to one side of that plunger, you're going to force it to move left or right or in or out, right? So there's not a lot of complexity when it comes to hydraulics, but there's a lot of fear and probably misunderstanding around working on hydraulics yourself, right? You don't have to really be certified or trained, and if you're kind of careful with things in general anyways, hydraulics is no different, right? But I want to cover some things, tools, some easy tools that you can buy, and also some basics about how this all works, and then also some basics on how hoses work and what you can do if you need a hose, right? So first things first, you want to get yourself some simple tools. You want to get yourself some snap ring pliers, and these come in different sizes. This is a larger size. This is a smaller size. And the heads on these, I like them because they have a little set screw, and they come with a bunch of different style heads. And you can have a 90-degree angle, 45, straights. You can have the skinnier, the wider tips on those. So I like those because the heads are changeable and interchangeable with many different styles that you get with the pliers. And this one has a ratchet effect, so you can turn the ratchet on, and it holds the pliers either in or out. And that way, when you go to take the snap ring off, you can take it off without having to have all the pressure on your hands. You just pull the snap ring out, then you release the ratchet, and it pops off the tool. So definitely get some of those. You can get these ones. I got these probably online, I want to say, and they're probably in the $50 to $75 range. But definitely get a good set, because these will not last. If you get the cheaper sets, they will bend, they will break. The tips will actually round off too much. They're not squared off. If they're not squared off, they won't grip the snap ring. And if they're rounded, you just gotta throw them away. So get the nicer set, and I would recommend the sets that have interchangeable heads. And that way you can replace them and or change the style to better suit what you're working on. Okay, next thing you're gonna wanna get are some hydraulic seal picks. Hydraulic seal picks are a set of picks, right? But they're hardened steel. And these things are gonna be probably one of the most valuable tools, and probably the cheapest tools when it comes to hydraulics that you're gonna own. You wanna get a decent set that's hardened steel. And they usually come in sets of 3, 4, or 5 different style picks. The one you're gonna use the most is the 90, and the second most is gonna be the straight. The hook one you use once in a while to pull seals out of tight spots, but mostly you're gonna go to the 90 and you're gonna go to the straight. And really what you're gonna use those for is for taking off rod seals. So the rod seal is gonna be inside the top hat area, right? I call this a top hat or a top mechanism. This is what you're looking at from the outside of the cylinder. This is an older John Deere one, but you can kind of envision you've got some O-rings on these, or you have rod seals inside the inner walls, or you have a seal on top just like this, right? So this is a wiper seal, right? So the wiper seal would go in here, and the rod seal would go inside the mechanism. These aren't the right ones, so they're larger than the mechanism, but you can imagine that's how it works. So to get those out, you're gonna use a pick. Right? You're gonna pick those out and clean up all the corners inside the groove so that you get all the rust and the dirt out of there. And the 90 is really, really nice because you can get in there with that, and you can do stuff on an angle, and it's not very hard to do. So that's the second set of tools you're going to want for hydraulics, the picks, right? Get a nice set because they'll last a long time and they won't bend. The third set, these are made for putting in the new rod seals. So the rod seal goes inside the outer cap mechanism, right? And to get that rod seal in, it can be super easy on a lot of these, but certain brands will be a little different, and it's not so easy, right? And the only way to get that rod seal in there, especially if it's a really stiff material, sometimes they're rubbery, more like elastic, and they're not that hard to bend. But lots of times they're not, right? And you can't really get that in there unless you collapse. You want to collapse that seal to make it smaller, to then put it inside the mechanism, and then uncollapse it, making it larger, and it fits right in the walls of it. And that's what these guys do. So you're going to put your rod seal on here, and you're going to put it on there, and you're going to take the tool and you turn it the other way, and it will take the rod seal and it'll do this to it. It'll just take it and it'll make it smaller, and then it'll push it as you push it down, just like that. And eventually it pushes it so far, it collapses it. You see that? And it'll come down and collapse it, and then you can actually get it to shrink smaller than physically it is when it's all the way out, allowing you to get it inside the mechanism. And then once you pull the tool out, it expands it again, and it just stays. So you want to get yourself some of those. These are for the rod seals, and again, picks, and then snap ring pliers. Get those three things. Once you get that for hydraulics, those are the main tools you're going to work with. You're also going to need, obviously, wrenches and whatnot to get the fittings off the hoses in some cases, and maybe a big socket set to get the nut that holds the plunger on the rod, to get that off. You can use adjustable wrench on that as well if you have one already. But the main specialty tools that I've used, and I've done a ton of hydraulic work over the years, are these things right here. So you're talking, maybe $150, maybe $50, it's $200. So maybe $250 worth of hand tools, and these should last you a long time, if not a lifetime, right? So that's my recommendation on the tools you'll need. The other things you want to watch out for but understand is that all the hydraulics, the rods and the top hats or the outer caps work the same way. The plungers, all the same way. So once you understand that, they're all the same. So the most common seal that you're ever going to change, and I've been doing this for a long time, is the rod seal. The rod seal and the wiper are absolutely the most two common seals on the hydraulic cylinder that you're going to change. And the way you change these, like I said, it's real easy. You just use the picks to take the old ones out, and then the wiper seal, you just press it in on the top usually, and sometimes you can take a socket and drive it in. It'll look like that once you put it in place. Before you put the wiper seal on, you're going to put the rod seal in. You're going to use these guys over here. You can do it without those guys, but it's a real pain, so you want to use those. So that's going to sit inside the mechanism on the inside. So that is those two seals will be the two most common ones that you'll see. The third most common one that fails is the O-ring on the outside of this top hat or the outer cap mechanism. That'll sweat. It'll show up as a sweat, not really much of a leak, but a sweat when you run the hydraulics. The rod seal will show up as a leak eventually. It'll be massive. Once that seal goes, it'll just leak right out of there. So those three seals, most common ones. And then if the plunger has a bad seal internally, what you'll notice is that it won't leak, it'll drift. And what I mean by drift is that you'll curl the bucket, for example, and over like a few seconds or minutes, it'll drift uncurled, and it'll just kind of go the other way. You're not even touching the loader joystick. So it's drifting inside, or it's letting the fluid pass through it inside the actual cylinder, therefore letting the plunger move in the other direction without even moving the controls. I call that drift, and that's a good sign that the plunger itself, the O-rings and the compression rings in the plunger area, those are worn, and there's just hydraulic fluid going around the plunger versus the plunger holding that fluid from going around it, right, and holding that rod in place. So that is really how all that works. When it comes to hoses, you got a ton of options nowadays. You can get hoses that are decent quality. You can get them made online, and they're really decent hoses, and you're not going to be paying that much. It gets really expensive sometimes when you get into the fittings. That's where you'll see the cost kind of go up quite a bit. If you want a 45 swivel, compression swivel, or a 90 compression swivel, it's going to cost you more. Like it's really not the hose that's expensive. It's really the fittings. And when you get into a very non-standard fitting, that's where you're going to pay a lot more money, right? So keep that in mind. When you're changing out a hose, if you can use a straight fitting, that's always going to be your cheapest replacement hose with fittings. Once you get into the 45s and the swivels and the 90s and the custom, the longer sweep 90s, you're getting into a lot more money just because the fittings are what's going to cost you. So my advice on hoses is, if you need a hose, go online, get the length you need, and figure out the size you need on the hose and the fittings. If you can go with straights, just go with the straights. You'll be surprised. I think this hose, off the shelf, 4-foot hose with 2 compression fittings on either side that are straight, it was like $35 free delivery, and I got it in a day. So, you know, you can't really complain, because if you go to a hydraulic shop that makes hoses and they make this hose for you, you're gonna pay about $150 for a 4-foot hose with the fittings on it, right? So you gotta do your research on hoses when you want to replace one, and you gotta know that you're gonna pay a lot more, because the fittings are gonna drive the costs up a lot. So try to get a straight fitting if you can, and get something off the shelf that's pre-made online, and they'll be just fine, right? You're not gonna have any issues. You know, go with a decent brand. I want to say Eaton is a decent brand. You want to kind of steer clear of the ones that are made in China, and you know, the ones with the fittings that aren't pressed on like this. If you look at this fitting, the way it's pressed on, you can tell it's done with a quality machine and a quality set of dies. So when you get into compression dies and making your own hoses, these are the nicer fittings compressed like this. If you see dimples, those are pressed together with somebody in their garage, basically, is making these, and kind of like using a, you know, $100 or $200 press to make these hoses. This one, you can tell it's made with a nice setup. It's got a complete compression all the way through the length of the fitting. So again, you know, $35, not bad. And if you want to have a shop make this, you're talking probably $100, $150 a hose. Shops like Napa makes hoses. I love Napa, but they get a ton of money for their hoses, and I'm sure they're good, and I'm sure they're great. But if you're just using it on a simple tractor or simple piece of equipment where the hoses, you know, don't have to be perfect, you might want to just shop around online and go with something like this, right? So I hope that helps you out. I know there's a ton more about hydraulics that you can learn, and that you can research on your own. I definitely recommend it. Do your own research, do your own learnings. But if you're looking to get started and you're not sure if you can do it, you absolutely can, and you can get into it for a couple $100 in tools, simple hand tools. And then if you have some simple knowledge about the hydraulics, how they work, they all work the same. So once you learn it, you're gonna be able to work on pretty much anything that has a hydraulic piston and rod type mechanism, and also hoses. They all pretty much are the same. So don't be afraid. I definitely recommend it if you're looking to get into it. You can save yourself a ton of money, and especially if you're a farmer or if you're a mechanic, a homeowner, and you have a lot of equipment on site and you need to maintain it, you'll save yourself a ton of money, and the convenience, it'll be well worth it. Okay, I wanted to add one more thing to that video. Sometimes when you get into the larger hydraulics, you know, a lot of times actually when you get into larger hydraulics, you need a spanner wrench. So a spanner wrench is used to take the top assembly off, right? And this is not one that would require that. This is a snap ring style. This is a John Deere, but a lot of the Kubotas and other brands, even the John Deeres, sometimes they require a different way to get that top cap out. And this tool here is called a spanner wrench, and it basically expands and lets you go wider or more narrow, and it lets you handle different size fittings. So the way it works, I like this one a lot because, again, it has the interchangeable heads, so you can fit any size assembly with the size spanner heads on there. You take these out and you would just thread them into the end of the wrench, and you take that wrench out and you would use that wrench on the top assembly. It'd have 2 holes in it, and it would look like two holes where the dowel pins could go in, and you'd put the wrench on there, and then you would turn it counterclockwise, to take the threads out, and then clockwise to put the cap back on with the threads. So that is actually something you'll want to get for sure as well once you get into hydraulics. That's about $100 for a decent one. This is hardened steel and it will last forever. You can get them probably a little bit less than that even if you shopped around. But okay, so that's really what I wanted to add, was just the fact that you're going to want a spanner wrench, eventually, or right away, especially if you don't have the snap ring set up on the cap. So you wouldn't want to use these. You wouldn't need to use these. You'd want to use the wrench or the snap ring pliers, depending on the way the top mechanism is designed. So actually there's one more thing I want to add as well. So when you talk about the sizes of the rods and the size of the seals that you need, a micrometer, this tool is going to be super valuable, right? So when you go to order, let's say, a rod seal, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to measure the width of the rod, and then that's what this tool is going to do. This one is nice. I like the digital ones because they do millimeter and inches, right? So you can take the rod size of the hydraulic seal. So for example, if you need a rod seal, you measure the rod size, and then you go online, right? You go online and you buy the new seal, right? Which is going to be this guy. Okay, so two things. You got to know the size of the rod, and then you also have to know the width of the seal that you want that fits in the groove in the top assembly. So once you know that, you go to a site like, for example, there's some really good companies out there, McMaster, right? I'll call it McMaster, and then Granger. You can go on the McMaster. I like McMaster just because their prices are really good, and their materials and their products are really, really high quality. And their shipping is absolutely amazing. Like I order some seals from McMaster on their website, and I want to say the next day they're on my front doorstep. And I've never had such great service from a company like that. Well, there's a few companies like that in the parts world, but they are right up there. Like they are really, really good. So McMaster is where you want to buy all your seals. And I'll get a rod seal like this, and it comes the next day, and it's about $10. It's a $10 seal. And the way I do it is I measure the rod. I go on their site. They have a listing for all the rod seals that are, let's say, 1.5 inches, and they have all the 1.5-inch rod seals in multiple widths. So I know which width I want. Do I want 3/8? Do I want 5/16? Whatever it is. I measure all that up with my tooling, right? And so I know exactly what I want. I go on their site, and they have the best delivery. They have the best quality. And in my mind, they are the go-to place for seals for hydraulic parts, right? So that is my advice. Micrometer and also McMaster is where you want to buy your seals from. And I tell you what, I've been doing this for a long time, and if you know these simple things, especially with the measuring of the rods and what to look for, and you go on McMaster's site, once you get used to it, you can fix anything. You can buy seals for anything. And I'll say this too, the seals I get on McMaster are better than the John Deere and or Kubota seals I'll get in the kits. And I buy a lot of hydraulic kits, which includes all the seals for one size cylinder. So for example, it includes all the rod seal, all the O-rings, all the plunger seal mechanism type things. And honestly, I've had seals that are brand new from the kits, the rod seals, that fail. As soon as you put them in, they're just a little bit too small, or they don't fit quite right. And I'll go on McMaster's site, I get the better seal that fits just right, and there's no issues. So, and these are Kubota, John Deere seal kits, and I go on McMaster's site and I get the rod seal, and it works better and is a much better fit than the one I got with the factory kit. So, you know, it says a lot about that site. So that's my advice. Micrometer and McMaster for your seals.